Who are the most exposed manufacturers in America? I mean, the car brands that are going to suffer the most because of Donald Trump's 25% tariffs. Well, obviously, companies like Audi and Porsche are pretty screwed because they don't make cars in America at all, not even a single one. But other brands might be even more exposed in some ways. I mean, well, nearly 1 million cars sold by Toyota in 2024 in America were made outside of America. And well, when it comes to Honda, of the 1.4 million cars that they sold in the United States, nearly 600,000 were imported. Hyundai say they're going to invest $11 billion in the US automotive industry, but it's going to take years for that to play out. At this point in time, Hyundai is extremely exposed to Donald Trump's tariffs. Of the 836,000 cars that they sold in America, 515,000 were made outside of the United States. That's 62%. What about Nissan? Well, Nissan's actually in the worst situation. Nissan sold around about 924,000 vehicles, that includes Infiniti, in America. Of those, 55% were imported. 55% were imported. In other words, 55% will get a 25% tariff on them. But of course, none of America's top 20 most American-made cars are Nissans. So even the Nissans made in America will also be taxed or get the 25% tariff because most of their parts don't come from the United States. Nissan is in deep, well, it's in a position here financially where I don't know how it's going to get out of it. I honestly think Nissan will have to either become a subsidiary of Honda, or it will simply be sold to a Chinese conglomerate. Maybe Geely. Maybe Geely's already offered. Who knows? Kia sold 796,000 vehicles in America last year, which was an all-time high. 68% of those, or 540,000, were not made in America. That's going to be tough for Kia. Subaru, 667,000 Subarus, in fact, around 670,000 were sold in America last year. Of those, 63% were not made in America. That's 420 to 440,000 were not made in America. The Volkswagen Group, yeah, they're kind of screwed as well. In total, they sold 652,000 cars. That's Volkswagen, Audi, and Porsche combined. Of those, 470,000 were imported, 72.2%. That's a very high percentage. So, at least 72.2% of all cars are being sold by the Volkswagen Group, Audis, Porsches, etc., will have a 25% tariff imposed on them. Mazda sold 424,000 vehicles, which was its best year on record. And Mazda's probably at very close here between Mazda and Nissan on who is the biggest loser to all of this. Mazda sells less than 1 million cars a year. So around 50% of all Mazda sales worldwide come from America. But Mazda makes very few cars in the United States. Of all the 425,000 cars Mazda sold in America, only 20% of those were made in America. 80% were imported. 79.7%. Mazda is in big, big trouble. Mercedes-Benz is also in trouble. I'll get to them later. They are one of the most exposed as well. 64% of all Mercedes-Benz were imported. BMW Group, same situation. Of the 400,000 cars that they sold, 57% of them were imported as well. Prices of most cars in the United States will go up this year as a result of Donald Trump's 25% tariff on all cars not made in America. Not only tariff on all cars not made in America, but also on all the parts coming to American cars. So even companies that make cars in America, all the parts that they use that are not sourced from America, they will get a 25% tariff put on those parts. This is going to be devastating for some car companies. Some car companies are going to be just absolutely destroyed in terms of their United States sales. Other companies will do, well, they won't be affected anywhere near as much. Hello, my friends. Welcome to the channel. I'm Sam Evans. You're watching the Electric Viking. Very, very difficult times now, isn't it, for many car makers because They're being absolutely spanked in China, which is a much bigger car market than the United States, around 31, 32 million cars. That's around double the number of cars sold in the United States. But this means if you put the United States and China together, those two car markets represent around 60% of all global sales. And if you're a car company who is getting its pants pulled down in those two countries, those two regions, then you could go bankrupt within a few years. It's very possible it could even happen faster than that. So let's have a look at which car companies are going to be in trouble. But first of all, will prices actually go up in America? Absolutely, they will. This is what Donald Trump said. This will continue to spur growth like you've never seen before in the US automotive industry and in US manufacturing. Now, will that happen? Yes, but it will mean, well, cars are going to cost you more money. The policy will push the price of new cars soaring, say some analysts. And in fact, economic group Anderson Economic Group says that new car prices will skyrocket. The president's remarks today suggest that automobile buyers and automobile workers are in for a shock starting in less than a month, said Patrick L. Anderson, the firm's CEO. Tariffs at these levels mean cost increases of $4,000 to $10,000 US dollars, including on most American cars. Tesla, of course, they won't be exempt from this because their cars aren't completely made in the United States, but they will be in the best financial position. This is definitely going to help Tesla more than anyone else. Now, the anticipated price increase will have a dramatic effect on car sales in the United States, say economists, and will cause job losses in Michigan, Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Missouri, Texas, South Carolina, and Alabama, as well as Ontario in Canada. Yeah, will it cause job losses in Mexico and Canada? Absolutely, there's no doubt. Will it cause job losses in America? Probably not in the way that economists are saying will happen. Anderson, though, said manufacturers will attempt to substitute parts and shift production to avoid the levies, because 25% is a huge amount. But they will also pass tariff costs that can't be initially avoided to customers and to dealers. The tariffs are an almost untenable head-scratching number for the US consumer, analysts at Wedbush Securities wrote in a March 26 note for investors. They estimate buyers could face a $10,000 US dollar increase. Autos Drive America, which represents the US operations of international motor vehicle manufacturers, also voiced concern that prices will go up. So what did America's largest union say? The UAW, which obviously doesn't like Trump or Tesla. Well, the UAW called the new trade policy a victory for auto workers, one that would end a harmful economic framework. We applaud the Trump administration for stepping up to end the free trade disaster that has devastated working class communities for decades, UAW President Shawn Fain said in a statement. To be fair here, Shawn Fain does have a point. I don't like him. In fact, I completely detest Shawn Fain. I think he should be in prison. I think he's broken numerous rules. And Shawn, you can sue me for that if you want to. I don't think you're going to win. But anyway, the point is, Shawn does have a point because think about it, right? The United States has said to Europe, free trade. You can send your cars here, send your Porsches, send your Audis over to America. No tariffs. But Europe hasn't returned the favor. This has been a long time now. All right? Europe has been charging 10% on all American cars. 10%. For years and years and years and years. That's not free trade. That's not free trade. And I don't understand why Obama or anyone else, the Democrats, always went, yeah, that's fine, no worries. Even Trump, why didn't Trump say anything about this in his first when he was first in power? Maybe he thought, it's too big of a deal to take on. I don't know why he didn't. But in my opinion, Shawn Fain does have a point because free trade has not been free trade. For numerous countries, that's been the case, where America's like, yeah, don't worry, it's free trade, you can send your cars here. But that country hasn't returned the favor. So it does make sense that the US would have a tariff that would equal whatever tariff they're trading with. That would be free trade in a sense, wouldn't it? Like, let's say Germany said, yeah, we're going to put tariffs on you, America, which they have for a long time, 10%. And America said, okay, well, we'll put tariff of 10% on you. I don't know why America didn't do that back then. Anyhow, Fain said this: workers must be held harmless during any disruption that accompanies the reshoring process with financial support from the federal government if necessary. So is this actually happening? Well, here's what Trump said. I think it's going to lead cars to be made in one location, adding that the tariffs will be 100% permanent and lead to $100 billion in annual revenue for the federal government. To give you some context, nearly half of all new vehicles sold in the United States in 2024, about 50% of them, were imported. The US imported $474 billion worth of automotive products in 2024, including passenger cars worth $220 billion. This will unquestionably be a crisis for Germany. Their automotive industry is already in a huge crisis. It's already in terminal decline. But also for Japan. The same thing applies to Japan. Japan is also struggling. Their sales, of course, Germans' car sales and Japanese car sales in China, which is their most important market, of course, are going down. And they are being disrupted by the Chinese. Now they're being disrupted by Trump, by policy in the United States. So this is going to be a huge draw on those brands. And I personally think this, if everything is logical, I mean, obviously the share market is more about emotion in many ways, but if everything was logical, the share price of companies like Volkswagen and Porsche would, and even Audi as well, would definitely be impacted. So should companies like Japanese car manufacturers, who a lot of them make a lot of their cars that they sell in America, they make them in Japan. Artificial intelligence says this. This will be the effect. Research suggests Mercedes-Benz, Subaru, and BMW will be massively affected by Trump's 25% tariffs on non-US made vehicles. The reason, 76% of Mercedes-Benz cars sold in the US are not made in America. 74% of Subarus are not made in America, and 67% of BMWs are not made in the US as well. Toyota, right? They actually have a lower percentage, but still 40% of Toyota's vehicles are not made in America. That is 933,000 last year. So nearly 1 million of Toyota's cars that they sold in America last year will now have a 25% tariff on them. I actually think this is going to affect Toyota more than anyone else, but simply by sheer numbers. And Toyota will obviously have to pivot, and they should be able to pivot faster, but still, this will take away, we're talking probably 1 million sales from the Japanese automotive industry. That's massive. Other car brands that will be massively affected include Volkswagen, which technically is about fourth place. The reason for that? Well, Volkswagen sold 200,000 cars in the United States last year. Of those, 80,000 were assembled in the US, 120,000 were imported, meaning 60% of Volkswagen's cars, they came from outside of America. 60%, that's a pretty big number. Plus, let's be real, a lot of the Volkswagen's parts are not being made in the United States as well. Honda will be affected. Around 30% of Honda's vehicles were imported last year. And even General Motors. I mean, General Motors, 5% of their cars were imported. Ford, 10% of their cars were imported as well.